don't realize how generational Jahmyr Gibbs is. Now me, I do. And he and Omar and Hampton are the best running backs in the league, bar none. It's not even close. Right, guys? See? They agree. Mm-hmm.
2023 NFL Draft.
Draft night in 2023 started with a move that set the internet on fire. The Detroit Lions traded back from pick 6 all the way to 12, grabbed some extra draft capital, and then used that selection on a running back.
The Detroit Lions select Jahmyr Gibbs, running back, Alabama.
People said it was way too high, and one analyst even handed the pick a D.
Nah, bro. I remember seeing Jahmyr Gibbs in that Bama LSU game with my actual eyeballs. I said, oh yeah, he's a problem. Immediately, he's a problem. He looked like he was running faster than everybody around him. I didn't say, I literally, bro, let me see if I can find a tweet. I literally said, this is a good pick. Let me see if I can find, I always talk about it though. It's not hard. How do I look for my tweets? From here, I got it. Where's Gibbs? Gibbs. Look. Immediately. Lions got Gibbs hell early, but I think he low-key the best running back in the draft. Dog, what? Look. Why did the Lions take him? He's the best running back, bro. Look at this. I literally said the Lions having the best draft so far. Them boys took Gibbs at 12. Like, no. Look, I've been on that train, bro. So no, I thought, I was like, yo, this dude's a good fucking running back.
Great.
He can do everything.
The consensus was simple. You just don't take running backs like him that high anymore.
That is
forward
very
3
true.
years now, and Jahmyr Gibbs has put up 49 touchdowns and racked up 3 straight Pro Bowl selections, breaking the Barry Sanders record in the process. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back to Dalton, Georgia to really see how this all started. Dalton, Georgia sits in the northwest corner of the entire state, about 90 minutes away from Atlanta. It's known as a carpet manufacturing town, so you don't really expect an NFL.
Get his bitch. 11 months. Get his bitch.
It's over, ladies and gentlemen.
Jahmyr Gibbs was born there on March 20th, 2002, but he didn't enter the world with the typical advantages that usually
Ain't he from Georgia?
lead to being a first-round pick. Because his parents were unable to care for him, his grandmother, Angela Willis, stepped in to raise him. The two of them moved around constantly for years, and there were long stretches where they stayed in local shelters. One of those places was called Family Promise, which is an organization that helps low-income families find stable ground when they have nowhere else to go. Football became the only
it's you again.
thing in his life that stayed the same. He showed up early to every single practice at Dalton High School, and even though he rarely said a word, the coaches definitely noticed his work ethic. They saw a kid who was always there and always working, even when they had no idea where he slept the night before. During one of those stays at the shelter, his grandmother met Greg and Dusty Ross, a couple who volunteered there regularly. The family stayed in touch as the years went by, and in 2017, when Gibbs was 15 years old, the Rosses officially adopted him. For the first time in his life, he had a permanent address and a stable family around him, and the results on the football field were immediate.
So I got a question. Since he made it to the league, does he thank his biological parents and like take care of them, or take care of his foster parents?
His junior year, he exploded for 1,430 yards and 20 touchdowns, which caused his recruiting profile to climb and his phone started to ring. The real turning point for his career happened on a Friday night in the fall of 2019. Dalton was playing Harrison High in a game televised nationally on ESPN2, but the cameras weren't there for Gibbs. Every recruiter and fan in the stadium was there to see Harrison's quarterback, Justin Fields, who was the top-ranked prospect in the entire country at the time. Jahmyr went out and ran for 182 yards and 2 TDs in a narrow 28-26 loss. And by the time the game ended, everyone was asking about the kid.
Yes.
wearing number 1 on the other team. That's how the conversation changed for good, because the scouts came to see Fields and left with Gibbs at the top of their boards. His senior season was on a completely different level. He finished the year with 2,554 rushing yards and 40 touchdowns, which were both state-leading numbers for Georgia. He was named the Georgia 6A Offensive Player of the Year and earned first-team All-American honors from Sports Illustrated. His ranking jumped from 3 stars to 4, and that matters because 4-star recruits are the players that schools like Alabama and Ohio State actually call. By the time he walked across the stage at graduation, he had piled up over 4,800 rushing yards and 70 career touchdowns. 28 different programs offered him scholarships, including heavy hitters like LSU, Florida, and Alabama. But instead of picking a powerhouse, he chose Georgia Tech. He doesn't care about being in the biggest program because he goes where he trusts the people around him. What nobody realized at the time, though, was just how difficult the situation he was walking into would actually be. Georgia Tech wasn't exactly a powerhouse back in 2020. They were an offense that couldn't find its rhythm and staring down the barrel of a 3-7 record in the season shortened by the pandemic. This was the situation Jahmyr Gibbs walked into as a true freshman, but the tape shows he was better than the rest of the roster from the very first snap. His college debut came against UCF, and he wasted no time making an impression on the opening kickoff. He didn't score, but he returned the ball 75 yards on the first touch of his career while playing in a hostile stadium against a Power 5 opponent at only 18 years old. By the time the clock hit 0, he had racked up 219 all-purpose yards and 2 TDs, which earned him Freshman of the Week honors from the ACC. What he did the rest of that weird short season was even more impressive than his debut. He finished those 7 games with 460 rushing yards and 303 receiving yards while finding the end zone 7 times. Since the year 2000, only 7 Power 5 players have cleared 450 rushing yards, 300 receiving yards, and 200 return yards in their first team's 8 games. When you look at the other names on that list, you see guys like Reggie Bush, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, and Joe Mixon. Gibbs put himself in that elite company before he even finished his first year on a team that lost 7 games. The losing didn't stop the following year, as Georgia Tech finished 3-9 in 2021 and sat dead last in the conference. Even though the team was struggling, Gibbs kept producing at a level that didn't seem possible given the circumstances. He put up 746 rushing yards and caught 36 passes for another 470 yards, scoring 6 times and adding an additional kickoff return touchdown for good measure. His total of 1,805 yards that year was the second most in a single season in the history of the program. The conference gave him first-team All-ACC honors as an all-purpose back, which was basically their way of admitting they had no idea how to stop him or classify him. The thing you have to understand about those 2 years at Georgia Tech is that Jahmyr Gibbs was the entire
1,800 yards ain't crazy.
Offense. He wasn't just a featured back or a piece of the puzzle, because when the team needed yards or a big third down conversion, they just handed him the ball. Most players in a bad situation like that see their stats disappear because the scheme is broken, or they get shut down because the defense knows exactly who's getting the ball. Jahmyr didn't let either of those things happen, and he stayed efficient and healthy while the rest of the country started to take notice. He had already proven he could be the best player on a bad team, so the only question left was whether he could do the same thing on a championship contender. He had 1 year of eligibility left in the tank, and he decided to head to Alabama to find the answer.
Yep.
Alabama didn't need a savior in 2022. Nick Saban had 5-star recruits at every single position, a Heisman winner in Bryce Young, and a roster that just came off a championship appearance. Jahmyr walked into that locker room as a transfer and had to fight for carries against players who had been top recruits in the country since high school. He had to prove he belonged in that room immediately, and he managed to do it before the calendar even hit October. The season opener against Utah State was a blowout, but the way Gibbs took 9 carries for 93 yards told a real story. He wasn't just easing his way into the rotation, and he ran the ball like a vet who had been in Saban's system for 3 years. A week later against Texas, the game plan shifted toward the air, and he finished the day with 9 catches for 74 yards and a score. Those 9 receptions were the most by any Alabama running back in a single game during the Nick Saban era. Brad Holmes, the general manager of the Detroit Lions, happened to be sitting in the stands for the Texas game. He later said after watching that games and Gibbs play, that afternoon left him convicted. He wasn't just impressed or interested in the kid, but he felt the decision was already made and the game film was just confirming what he already knew. There was still a conversation about whether Jahmyr was just a running back who couldn't handle a heavy workload. The Arkansas game ended it for good. He handled 18 carries for 206 yards and 2 touchdowns, including 2 massive runs that went for 72 and 76 yards. His yards per carry average in that game was the second best in the history of the Alabama program. Alabama suffered 2 close losses to Tennessee and LSU that kept him out of the playoffs, but Gibbs was incredible in both those matchups and put up over 150 scrimmage yards in each. When the season was over, Nick Saban gave an assessment.
You heard what he said. LSU kept him out.
And that was about as high as it gets from a coach who usually keeps his praise in check. He called Jahmyr a smart, experienced player who truly understood how to execute a complex scheme. Coming from a man who has sent dozens of players to the first round of the draft, that focus on football IQ was a huge green flag.
That was, bro, I thought Hendon Hooker was going to be so good, and then nigga fucked up his arm and shit.
Plenty of guys in college can run fast, but very few can pick up a blitz, change their protection, run a perfect route, and still have the gas to take a handoff 70 yards. But Jahmyr Gibbs could do every bit of it. The NFL Combine gave scouts one more nugget to chew on. Jahmyr Gibbs ran a 4.36 40-yard dash, which was the second fastest in his draft class. For a player whose receiving skills already made him a unicorn, adding that kind of elite straight line speed made the total package almost impossible to ignore. He wasn't just a slot receiver trying to play running back, but rather a true back who could run routes like a pro and still power through arm tackles when things got crowded. Bijan Robinson was the first back off the board when Atlanta took him at 8th overall. That move didn't shock anyone because Bijan had been the consensus top prospect at the position for the entire year. What happened just 4 picks later is where the draft really got interesting for the rest of the league. Detroit originally held the 6th overall pick, but they decided to trade back 6 spots to 12 while picking up an extra 2nd and 5th round selection from Arizona. General managers trade back to stockpile draft capital all the time, as it's a standard way to build a roster. What wasn't standard, however, was what they used that 12th pick on, which was Jahmyr Gibbs. And the reaction in the draft world was like someone who had just flipped a table in a quiet room. The immediate takes were brutal, with one analyst calling the pick a belly flop while others claimed the Lions reached way too early. One draft grade even came in at a D, but the loudest complaints weren't actually about Gibbs as a player. Running backs had spent the last decade getting pushed down draft boards because the league decided they were easy to replace. The logic was that you can find a 1,000-yard runner in the 3rd round, so spending a top 12 pick on one is just bad asset management. Before Bijan Robinson went at 8 that year, the last pick to be taken in the top 10 was Saquon Barkley back in 2018. And people debated that pick for years afterwards. Taking a running back in the top 12 of the same draft felt like the Lions had missed something obvious that everyone else saw. Brad Holmes didn't see it that way at all, though. He wasn't looking at Gibbs as a traditional running back because the games from Alabama showed a player who ran routes like a wideout and served as Bryce Young's primary target on 3rd downs. Holmes eventually told the—
Yeah, I got a question. Y'all think if the NFL started over completely, all 32 teams with no rosters, do y'all think a running back goes in the 1st round? Like, obviously, after the top 12 picks of quarterbacks, and then the next 12 picks are probably defensive players. Do y'all think a running back sneaks into the 1st round? I'm genuinely asking. I literally just thought about that like just now. So I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. I don't think there is. But I literally just thought about that, and I was like, damn.
public that the Lions staff put Gibbs in his own separate box during the evaluation process, which kept him away from the standard running back labels.
That's
Before
what I'm
the
saying,
season
like,
even kicked off, offensive
not
coordinator
go
Ben
first.
Johnson mentioned that Detroit might use Gibbs in a way that people wouldn't expect. That isn't how a coach talks about a guy who just takes 20 carries up the middle, but rather how you describe a chess piece that can break a defense. The critics have made their case and Detroit had made theirs, which meant it was finally time for Jahmyr's game to settle the debate. Week 1 of the
Obviously,
2023
like Bijan and Gibbs to go first and second, in my opinion. They could go Bijan, Gibbs, maybe Derrick Henry, and then CMC and Saquon. Am I forgetting anybody?
season had the Lions face off against the Kansas City Chiefs, who were the
100%.
defending
That's what I'm
champions
saying,
at the
like-
time. Dan Campbell
Well, maybe not Quentin Nelson, but Bijan or none of them. They're not going before Myles Garrett, PS2, TJ Watt probably, the Kyle Hamiltons, Derwin Jameses, the Jamar Chases maybe, Jettas probably they would go before them, the Dexter Lawrences. So yeah, they'd be second round probably.
Lions were looked at as a feel-good story who just hadn't arrived
Max
just
Crosby,
yet. Jahmyr Gibbs only got 7 carries in that debut, though.
This is not
David
true.
Montgomery handled most of the heavy lifting that night, but even in limited touches, Gibbs showed enough flashes that anyone watching closely knew exactly what was coming. That limited role was going to have to be reality for a little while, because Detroit signed Montgomery to be the veteran lead back. Campbell wasn't about to hand a rookie the keys to the car on the very first day of school. A hamstring strain in weeks 5 and 6 slowed down his momentum just as his role started to grow. Gibbs had to sit out 2 games right when the offense was beginning to lean on him more, which sucked, but he finally returned in week 7 against Baltimore and took a 21-yard run into the end zone for his first career NFL touchdown. The Lions got blown out 38-6 in that game, but the score served as a sign of things to come. The very next week was when the entire narrative around him shifted. It was Monday Night Football in week 8 and Montgomery sat out with a rib injury. Dan Campbell decided to give Gibbs 26 carries and let him loose in front of a national audience. He finished that night with 152 yards on the ground and another 37 through the air, totaling 189 yards from scrimmage and a touchdown in a 26-14 victory. The run game had been a bit up and down all year, but it suddenly looked unstoppable with number 26 in the backfield. What Brad Holmes saw at Alabama in that stadium back in September was finally playing out on primetime TV. Gibbs wasn't just a small part of the scheme anymore, because when he had space to move, he became the entire offense. The rest of the year went exactly how you'd expect once a talent like that finds his rhythm. He averaged 5 yards per carry for the rest of the year. By the time the regular season ended, he had 945 rushing yards and 10 scores on the ground to go along with 316 receiving yards. Among all rookies that year, he led the league in rushing touchdowns and finished near the top in total scrimmage yards. He also led all rookies in rushing yards before contact. The postseason was where the talk about him changed from good rookie to something different. He managed to find the end zone in all 3 of Detroit's playoff matchups. The Lions won their first playoff game since 1991, ending a 32-year drought. And Gibbs was one of the biggest reasons they pulled it off. A city that had been waiting 3 decades for a win finally had something to celebrate, and the 21-year-old kid from Georgia was the one leading the charge. The Pro Bowl nod and the all-rookie honors were the perfect way to cap off that first season. He became only the 3rd rookie in the history of the franchise to put up 1,000 yards and 10 TDs, which puts him in the same company as Barry Sanders and Billy Sims.
Damn.
Most players deal with the sophomore slump, but for Gibbs, the second year felt more like a total revelation. Going into the 2024 NFL season, everyone pretty much had the
It's just that nigga Gibbs just be gliding.
same question. Was that breakout rookie campaign just being in the right place at the right time, or was he actually something special? Detroit kept the offensive line together and brought David Montgomery back into the fold, so the pieces were there, but the expectations for this franchise were higher than they'd ever been in decades. By
Yo, Cam, stop sending me finesse 2 times videos.
the time November
I'm fine.
rolled around, Gibbs had already provided a definitive answer to every skeptic in the league. The final stat line for 2024 was staggering, as he finished with 1,412 rushing yards and 16 touchdowns on the ground, while adding another 517 yards and 4 more scores through the air. When you add all of it up, you get 1,929 total scrimmage yards and 20 touchdowns, a number that didn't just lead the running backs or the NFC. He led the entire NFL in touchdowns. Only 3 players in the history of the NFL have ever put up a season with at least 1,900 scrimmage yards, 16 rushing touchdowns, and 4 more receiving scores. David Johnson hit those numbers back in 2016 during one of the most dominant individual runs we've seen in the last 10 years. And Marshall Faulk did it in 2000 when he nearly won the MVP. The only other name on that list is O.J. Simpson from 1975, which means Gibbs joined an insane group before he even turned 23 years old. There's another record from that season that deserves way more attention than it actually gets from the national media. He managed to produce at least 70 scrimmage yards in every single game of the 17-game regular season, a level of consistency that no other player in league history had ever achieved over a full schedule before. On top of that, he set a new NFL record by averaging at least 5 yards per carry on 10 or more attempts for 7 straight weeks. The accolades followed the production, and he earned his 2nd straight Pro Bowl selection to start his career. In the long history of the Lions, only Barry Sanders and Billy Sims managed to make the Pro Bowl in each of their first 2 seasons. Seeming like Gibbs was the next man up for this organization, but things were about to get weird for the Lions.
Good, Don. It's good, man. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's good.
The 2025 season serves as the ultimate litmus test for Jahmyr Gibbs to see if he can actually carry an entire offensive load when the scheme isn't directly benefiting him. Everything changed during January 2025 when Ben Johnson actually left the Lions to head coach the Chicago Bears, and the Lions signed Johnny Morton. Johnny Morton made it clear that his version of this team was going to be a little bit different for the offense and for Jahmyr Gibbs specifically. Under the previous regime, the offense had a beautiful rhythm where the run game set up the play action, and that play action created massive lanes for Gibbs on angle routes or out in the flat. Morton was working from a completely different blueprint, and the results were clunky from the jump. Detroit managed to start the year with a 5-3 record, but the offense never looked as locked in or as dangerous as it had during those first 2 years. The new scheme leaned much more heavily on the pass and tried to use Gibbs as a wide receiver more often, a change he actually supported in the media by saying he had been waiting for a bigger role in the passing game. The problem was that the pieces around him weren't always in the right spot to make this new vision work. The breaking point came in week 10 after a tough loss to Minnesota, leading Dan Campbell to take over the play calling duties for the rest of the season. The impact was immediate as the Lions went out the very next Sunday and hung 44 points on Washington, while Gibbs exploded for 172 scrimmage yards and 3 TDs. 2 weeks later, he absolutely torched the Giants for 264 yards and 3 scores, including a 69-yard touchdown run in overtime that ended the game right then and there. Those performances earned him 2 NFC Offensive Player of the Week awards and showed exactly what this offense could do when the running game had a clear sense of direction. Even with the late season surge, Campbell couldn't fix everything in time to save the playoff run, and the Lions finished 9-8 to miss the postseason. Morton was let go just 2 days after the final game of the year, and in the offseason the Lions picked up Gibbs' 5th-year option, looking to hammer out a long-term deal in the near future. Jahmyr even said after the season that his best is yet to come. When you look at the 3 Pro Bowls, the 49 touchdowns, and the historic records he's already broken before age 25, the idea that there's another level to his game is a scary thought for the rest of the league. The film on Jahmyr Gibbs tells the same story at every single stop. Whether he was playing at Dalton, Georgia Tech, Alabama, or now in Detroit, the production followed him every time the competition got harder. So there you have it. Subscribe if you're new and watch this next video if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.
Vids.